size, the larger the satellite that can be flung into space. By the Russians to further the communist cause. But remember, they are propaganda.
Live dog. This is reportedly history's first space traveler.
Information on the length and breadth and design to today's rocket.
On November 3, 1957, Soviet scientists sat in a control room in Moscow and listened to a heartbeat. It was coming from space. It belonged to a dog named Laika, the first living creature ever sent into orbit. And then, the signal changed. What those scientists heard in that room was never officially released. This is what actually happened. Her name was Laika, a small, calm, stray dog, picked off the frozen streets of Moscow in the autumn of 1957. She wasn't chosen because she was special. She was chosen because she was already used to surviving with nothing, no shelter, no guaranteed food, just cold air and concrete. The Soviet government had given their scientists an impossible deadline, 30 days. Put a living creature into orbit, make it work, make it look like a triumph. There was no plan to bring her back. But let that sit for a moment. They built the capsule, they trained the dog, they ran the tests, and at no point, not once, did anyone design a return mission. There was no re-entry system, no parachute, no recovery protocol. Laika was always going one way. What the Soviet government told the world, Laika was comfortable inside the capsule. She had food, water, and oxygen for several days. The mission was a complete success, and she lived and orbited the Earth peacefully before passing away quietly. Millions of people believed that story. For 45 years, that was the official version. What was actually written inside the classified mission files was something else entirely. But here is the detail that changes everything. The Soviets were not the only ones listening to that transmission. While Soviet scientists monitored Sputnik 2 from Moscow, American tracking stations on the other side of the world were independently locked onto the same signal. The United States military had been tracking Soviet satellites since Sputnik 1. When Sputnik 2 launched with a biological payload, the monitoring intensified immediately. A CIA internal memo dated January 1958, now publicly available through the Freedom of Information Act, contains a specific reference to, quote, biological signal termination from the Soviet orbital craft. They were not guessing, they had the data. America knew what had happened to Laika within hours of launch. In 2002, more than 4 decades later, a Soviet scientist named Dmitry Malyshenkov stood up at a space conference in Houston, Texas, and finally told the truth. He was 70 years old, and he had worked directly on the Sputnik 2 mission as a young engineer. He said this, Laika did not survive for days. She did not drift peacefully through orbit. She died within 5 to 7 hours of launch. The thermal regulation system inside the capsule had failed. A critical component had been damaged during the rushed assembly. Remember, they had 30 days to build this. The internal temperature began rising almost immediately after reaching orbit. Within hours, the cabin had reached over 40 degrees Celsius. The biological monitors that Soviet scientists were watching in Moscow showed the progression in real time. Laika's heart rate became elevated, then erratic, then dangerously rapid, and then it flatlined. 5 to 7 hours after launch, the Soviet government knew by that evening. But their greatest propaganda triumph, Tsuris, a living creature in space, had lasted less than 1 working day, and they told the world she was fine. But here is what makes this truly disturbing. Both governments had the same data. Both governments made the same choice, and neither one said a single word. For the exact same reason. The space race was not just a competition between 2 countries. It was a global propaganda war. Every launch, every milestone, every achievement, it was all ammunition. In 1957, the Soviet Union was winning. Sputnik 1 had already sent shockwaves through the American government and public. The idea that the Soviets had put the first satellite into orbit, that they were ahead, triggered genuine panic in Washington. Now imagine what would have happened if the full truth about Laika came out. A living dog, I'm sent into space with no way home, dead within hours due to a rushed, poorly assembled capsule, built under political pressure from a leader who wanted a propaganda win before a national holiday. The international outcry would have been enormous. Animal rights groups, scientists, the general public. It would have shifted the entire narrative of the space race from Soviet triumph to Soviet recklessness. And crucially, it would have raised uncomfortable questions about what America was willing to do in its own rush to catch up. So, the decision was made, on both sides, quietly, without a meeting or a signed agreement, just 2 governments independently reaching the same conclusion. stay silent. The official Soviet story held. Laika lived for days. The mission was a success. The world moved on. That version of events remained unchallenged in public for 45 years, until that conference room in Houston in 2002. But there is one final piece of this story, one detail that even most space historians do not spend much time on, and it is arguably the strangest part of all. It involves what was still broadcasting from that capsule, months after Laika had died. Sputnik 2 did not immediately fall out of orbit. The capsule, with Laika's remains still inside, continued circling the Earth for 5 months, from November 1957 all the way through to April 14, 1958. During those 5 months, the craft's instruments continued transmitting signals. Tracking stations around the world, Soviet, American, and independent, were all picking up data from the capsule. The biological monitors had gone silent hours after launch, yet that much was expected. But other instrument readings continued. Telemetry data, systems data, signals that Soviet engineers logged and analyzed, and which were never fully published or explained in any public document. What exactly those readings showed, what information was still coming down from a capsule carrying a dead dog through the vacuum of space for 5 months, has never been officially disclosed. When Sputnik 2 finally re-entered the atmosphere on April 14, 1958, it burned up completely on re-entry, somewhere over the Caribbean. No wreckage, no recovery, no physical evidence of any kind. Everything that was inside that capsule, every instrument, every record, every remaining trace, disintegrated at thousands of degrees over open ocean. In 2008, more than 50 years after the mission, a small monument was quietly unveiled outside a military research facility in Moscow. A simple sculpture, a rocket with a small dog at the tip. No ceremony was reported publicly. No government official gave a speech. It is the only formal acknowledgement the Russian government has ever made. No apology, no full declassification, no explanation of the thermal failure or why the rush timeline was approved. And critically, some of the original transmission records from the morning of November 3, 1957, the records from those first 5 to 7 hours, remain classified to this day. We know she launched. We know she died within hours. We know both governments monitored every second of it in real time. What was in those final transmission readings? What Soviet scientists were actually watching on their monitors in that Moscow control room as the signal changed? Officially, nobody is saying. There is an Apollo-era NASA audio recording that was removed from the public archive in 1974. No explanation was given. The file reference still exists, but the recording itself is gone.